These times, they are so uncertain. There is a yearning undefined. People filled with rage. We all need a little tenderness. How can love survive in such a graceless age? The trust and self-assurance that lead to happiness, they're the very things we kill, I guess. Pride and competition. And the more I know, the less I understand. All the things I thought I had figured out, I have to learn again. I've been trying to get down to the heart of the matter. But everything changes, and my friends seem to scatter. But I think it's about forgiveness. Forgiveness. I've been trying to get down to the heart of the matter. The gospel according to Don Henley. Don Henley, anyone? Don Henley? All right, Don Henley. One of the founding members of the Eagles. They dominated the 1970s. They're still together, the Eagles. And I'm not connecting with anybody except the old folks like me? Okay. The Eagles. They're still together. They are going to play in Washington, D.C. Tuesday and Wednesday. How do I know? Because I put it on my calendar. When Lisa and I were trying to figure out how we were going to be able to see all of our family, they're all spread out. How are we going to get to see my daughter Meredith and her husband Matt and our grandsons Calvin and Walter? We looked, and I noticed, hey, wait a minute. The Eagles, still together after all these years, a few breakups in between, they're going to play in Washington, D.C. Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, it didn't work out into our plans, but I had it on the calendar. Had it worked out, it would have been a beautiful thing. I did see the Eagles several years ago in Chicago with my daughter Erin. Would have gone back had it worked out. We'll see. Maybe they'll play, maybe they won't. Maybe COVID will force them to cancel. Maybe it already has. I'll have to check that. But they're still playing. And as I think you know, if you've been around very long, I like to see in what would be called secular songs or secular lyrics, God speaking through those things. And some might say, well, those are secular songs and they don't belong in the church and they don't have anything to say about God or the Spirit or the faith life or the church. But I beg to differ, because if it's love, if it's truth, no matter where it comes from, it's of God. And so it hit me as I read this scripture for this morning. This song hit me with Don Henley singing, I've been trying to get down to the heart of the matter, which is exactly what Jesus is trying to do with the crowd, with his opponents, and with the disciples, to try to get down to the heart of the matter. We are back in the Gospel of Luke this morning. Here's your assignment. It's not very difficult. It's difficult enough that even I only did this recently. I want you to read the entire Gospel of Mark from beginning to end in all one sitting. And you can do it. The Gospel of Mark was the first one written. It is also the shortest one, only 16 chapters there, and they're shorter chapters than in the other Gospels. It is possible that in one sitting, get you a cup of coffee or a second cup of coffee, get you a large cup of coffee, and sit down and read Mark from the beginning to the very end. It is an awesome experience for a couple of reasons, for lots of reasons, a couple of which I want to point out this morning. The Gospel of Mark is one continuous narrative. It is one story from beginning to end. That's why you can read it that way. Mark has taken what's been handed to him. He's taken the traditions of the early followers of Jesus. He's taken collections of parables and collections of sayings, and he's taken oral traditions, and he's taken written traditions, and he's put those together in a way that one event leads to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and it's one story. It's a really cool experience. The other thing that you'll see emerge is a pattern in the Gospel of Mark. And here it is. We see it in this lesson today, and we see it elsewhere. Jesus often speaks to three audiences at the same time, or at least in the same place, or at least in the same context. There's the crowd. He's speaking to the crowd. Jesus has become somewhat of a rock star himself. He has a huge following at this point. It will not last. It will break down. But the crowds followed him. They crushed in on him. He had all these crowds, and he used that opportunity to teach those crowds. The other audience, the opponents. Jesus runs into this opposition. They're always there, and he's always in dialogue with those opponents. And then the third audience, and I would like to say the most important, even though all three audiences are important, that third crowd, his disciples. His disciples. The miracles that he's doing, the people he's touching, the people he's curing, all very, very important as parts of his mission. But in the Gospel of Mark, what is really, really, really important is teaching his disciples. Teaching his disciples. And so we get this pattern of the crowds, the opposition, and then sitting down with those disciples and trying to make sure that they understand. But you know what? They never do understand. They never do understand on this side of the resurrection. They never get it. You'll see this when you read all the way through. They never get it. They fail all the way to the very end. It's only after the Gospel of Mark closes and we see what happened in the early church that indeed they finally did get it because of the death and the resurrection of Jesus. But this audience is so important to Jesus. His 12 guys, his students, his friends. This morning, the gospel lesson appears to come under the heading of the importance of hand sanitizing, right? This is the context of this morning's gospel lesson. The opponents come to Jesus and they look and they go, hey man, why is it that your followers don't wash their hands before they eat? This is the tradition of our people. We're very careful to make sure that we wash our hands before we eat, and we wash everything that's connected to anything that we might eat. Of course, they're not really talking about eating as much as they're talking about ritual purity. For them, they wanted to be ceremonially clean. This really had to do with the priests, okay? The priests, before they go into the presence of God in the Holy of Holies, they needed to be clean. They needed to be undefiled. And these are the ways in which they accomplished that. And then the Pharisees tried to extend that to the people. And so they questioned Jesus. They tried to trip him up. Why? Why do your followers not wash their hands? And they're making a big deal about the smallest things. And they run into opposition, and Jesus runs into opposition with them because they're talking about two different things. They're talking about purity of the hands to be ceremonial clean, and Jesus is talking about another kind of cleanness. He's talking about the purity of heart. The purity of heart. And the message to all three groups is the same. Purity comes from within, from the state of the heart, not from ritual behavior. Let's get back to the heart of the matter, Jesus says. It's not about what we do, even though what we do can be helpful. It's about what is the condition of our heart, the state of our heart. This first group, the Pharisees. Let's not be too hard on the Pharisees. The Pharisees are trying to maintain their identity in a time and a place where their identity is trying to be wiped out by others. They're trying to maintain their identity, and these are the things that we do as the people of God. And so they put these rules in place, but they just got the priorities misplaced. But let's not be too difficult on them. That's what they wanted to do. So Jesus doesn't criticize them for making these rules, but he says, be very careful. When you set up these rules, when you take the law and develop rules out of it, be very, very careful. What you're trying to do is to establish who's on the inside and who's on the outside. And if our people wash their hands and your people don't wash your hands, we're on the inside and you're on the outside. And Jesus says, be very, very careful. If you let those rules run your life and prioritize the way in which you put your society together, you might end up finding yourself on the outside. And those who you think were on the outside are now on the inside. Be very, very careful. And so Jesus quotes Scripture. He quotes the prophet Isaiah, who said, "These people draw near to me with their mouths, and they honor me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me. And their worship of me is a human commandment, learned by rote." You're just doing this thing over and over and over again. It's a habit. It's second nature. We don't even think about it. It becomes a commandment. It's a human tradition, but it's not the commandment. And of course, the New Testament teaches this as well. In Colossians, we read, "If with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the universe, why do you live as if you still belong to the world? Why do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch." All these regulations refer to things that perish with use. They are simply human commands and teachings. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-imposed piety, humility, and severe treatment of the body, but they are of no value in checking self-indulgence. From Colossians. And this is the way Jesus put it to the Pharisees in our gospel. You sure do have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. Rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. An incredibly important point here. Jesus is not here to condemn the commandments or to condemn the law. He is here to fulfill the law. The commandments are good. The law is there for our own good. He's not rejecting them. What he's saying is, if you're not careful, what you're doing is rejecting the commandment in order to follow the commandments of a law that you set up, of regulations that you've set up. And he gave an example. And this is where it gets down into the weeds a little bit, but I think it's worth pointing out. He gave an example of how they were doing this. That word korban came up. Korban is a special gift to God. It's a gift that can only be used for God and by God. And what Jesus was saying was, it looks to me like, guys, that you've got some people who are saying, I really can't take care of my elderly mother and father. And understand, there was no social net back then. There was no Social Security. It was our responsibility to take care of our aging parents. And it appears to me, fellas, that what you're saying is, I've made this special gift to God. I can no longer care for my aging parents. And in that way, Jesus says, you missed the whole point. That's what the law is for. That's what the commandments are for, that we take care of each other. We take care of our elderly parents. We reach out to the neighbor. That's what the law is there for. You've made a rule now that prevents your people from doing what God has commanded them to do. A man-made regulation in place of a commandment directly from God. And then Jesus turns to the crowd. And they're listening to this conversation. And they're very, very interested in this teacher and this healer. Who is this guy? And Jesus says to the crowd, there is nothing on the outside of a person that by going in can defile. But the things that come out are what defile. And of course, again, we're talking about eating. Eating has been coming up a lot lately. We're talking about having this cleanliness so that we're able to eat. And Jesus says it's not so important. The actual eating, that's not what is so important. That's not going to last very long anyway. That's all going to get flushed out. What's important, not what goes in, but what comes out. What is it that resides in the heart? What is the condition of your heart? What are your motivations? What is it that's important to you? What is it that drives the way that you live? That should come from the heart. That's what needs to be transformed. Purity comes from within, from the state of the heart, not from ritual behavior. Let's get back to the heart of the matter. And then Jesus leaves, goes into the house. This happens over and over in the Gospel of Mark. And he sits down, he gets real close with these guys. Again, understand this. Understand how critically important it is that Jesus have this time with these guys. So critically important. He had empowered them and sent them out to do the very things that he is doing. Sometimes they're okay at it. Sometimes they completely fail at it, but he sticks with it. This is a huge emphasis of his is to teach these 12. When he had left the crowd, he entered the house. His disciples asked him about the parable. And he said to them, "Then you do also fail to understand? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from the outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart but the stomach and goes out into the sewer?" Thus he declared all foods clean. And he said, "It is what comes out of a person that defiles. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All of these things come from within, and they defile a person." Teaching his disciples face to face, in close quarters, what's really important. And what's really important is what comes from the heart. Did you know that that's us? Did you know that today that we gather here as disciples to be taught by Jesus? Not by me, I can only point. But we have gathered here in the presence of the risen Jesus, in the Word, in the Spirit, in the juice, and in the bread. Be in the presence of Jesus and to try to understand and to try to get what the disciples never got on this side of the resurrection and within the pages of the Gospel of Mark, that it's all about the condition of our own hearts. And together we hold each other accountable for that. And the things that we do that seem that they're only outward in appearance, and sometimes they are and sometimes they're not, but we hope that what we do here, if they are ritualistic in nature, we hope that they're actual pointers to Jesus, and they're actual pointers to what truly is important. And we will truly, together, as brothers and sisters of Christ and sons and daughters of God, that we truly will get back to the heart of the matter.